I have now read the Bible from cover to cover, and there can be no denying the fact that the Old Testament is full of stories and happenings which appear to be exceedingly difficult to reconcile with what the average socialized individual might consider to be a reasonable morality. There are many examples of God condoning war and massacre, as well as instructions given out on slavery. The question then is, why should we entertain the Bible with all of its immorality? Many see the answer to this question as we shouldn't. In this video, I want to offer up my ideas with this in mind. Before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about why that is. Why do I want to offer up my ideas? Well, I suppose this will just be a reiteration of what I said in my very first video, the very first video on this channel. In that video, I explained how what I want is what's best for people, although I lose sight of that goal very frequently. But that is the reason why I created this channel. It's the reason I'm making this video, and it's the reason why I continue to put in as much effort as I can manage into my videos, despite their poor performance. I'm of course affected by their performance, because as I said, I lose sight of my goal of wanting what's best for people very frequently, and I fall into temptations of status and fame. But when I'm thinking straight, the only reason that I should care about my video performance is because their reach is directly correlated with their potential to help people out. What I'm trying to say here is that I want to offer up my ideas not because I want views, not because I want to try and convert you to my way of thinking, but because I hope they can bring you closer into line with the good, as they have done for me. With all that said, let's come back to the issue at hand. So the reality of the Bible's immorality seems to leave us with two options. We can either question the nature of God, or we can question the validity of the Bible. But many don't seem to do so. They just decide that Christianity and the Bible are both archaic and immoral, and they reject them both without further consideration. I am actually in agreement with those who reject Christianity and the Bible to some extent here, because I simply do not know how to logically defend the argument that the Bible was written by God, that the Bible's only author was God, even though it had many transcribers. So, in other words, that the Bible is an infallible word of God. I simply do not know how to logically defend that argument, especially if we are to also accept the premise that God is the summum bonum, or the highest good, if we define God as love itself. But this doesn't mean that I reject Christianity and the Bible. The exploration cannot end there. We have to actually consider the two options that I laid out and what they might mean, because they don't always mean that Christianity is archaic and immoral, or that the Bible is just a stupid book. So here are just a few ideas which I hope will open your mind back up to exploring the Bible. So in relation to the nature of God, I made a 4-part series titled Can God Really Be Good?, where I discussed whether or not the concept of God defined as the highest good might be too rudimentary a view. This is of course the prevailing view throughout Christianity and pretty much the only view that the churches hold. If you would like to hear a detailed discussion on this topic, I've linked that series below in the description. So there is an alternative to the definition of God that all of the Christian churches provide for us, and that alternative can be found in Gnosticism. So I discussed Gnostic ideas in that 4-part series, and much of the content within it was inspired by Carl Jung's book, An Answer to Job. In Gnosticism, God isn't seen as a conscious being and loving Father who embodies all that is good. At least this symbol is insufficient to describe him in his totality. Instead, God is seen as everything. God is reflected in all of his creation. Now, following this train of thought, we can view the biblical text in a new light. Because God is everything, he has a dual nature which he is initially unconscious of. And as man transcends the higher planes of consciousness, man becomes aware that God has a dual nature. Man becomes aware that in this world, if he makes the requisite sacrifices, he won't always be accepted. He realizes that if you do well, you might not be accepted. That's just not how it works in this world. Universal justice is not established in this life. And so when man becomes conscious of that, God becomes man. This is said to be the reason, or part of the reason, why God becomes man. There is much more to these ideas, which I discussed in the video series linked below. They are all part of a divine drama, which is represented historically by events in time, and these events in time are recorded in scripture. Many of the stories in the Bible are representative of the divine story, which occurred at the beginning of time, and which has been manifesting itself periodically ever since. What the biblical stories represent, the divine drama or the divine story, exists in what's called the divine pleroma, which is infinitely complex and meaningful, and which we will never fully understand. If all of this sounds too abstracted, again, the series linked below is more detailed. The key idea here is that the biblical narrative represents reality as it is. God is no longer seen as the summum bonum. This symbol of the loving Father is no longer sufficient to characterize God in his totality. Creaturely man is no longer diametrically opposed to the loving, good God in heaven. An evil of cosmic proportions is no longer laid at the feet of creaturely man. And like I said, this allows us to view the Bible in a new light. God is seen as reflective of the reality we see around us. And the Bible contains some of the oldest and therefore longest surviving writings about the nature of that reality and what it means for us. We can no longer expect the Bible to be representative of a perfect morality because the world around us is not perfect. The reality in which we live is not perfect. We are not the source of all evil in this world. Hopefully you find these ideas interesting. Another thing to note here is that I still don't think, even though we do not have to accept the premise of God defined as the highest good, I still don't think that we can maintain the infallibility of the Bible. This is because many parts of the Bible define man's relationship to the universe completely differently, and so I don't think that they're reflective of God's will or of reality. Instead of defining man's relationship to the universe as to discover and fulfill the will of God, rather than defining man's purpose as that, parts of the Bible define it differently. But I'm not going to talk about such matters here. That is just some food for thought. This topic will be discussed in my next video, which will be about the nature of religion. What about our second option? What if we maintain that God is love itself? Well, this would call into question the validity of the biblical text, because if God is the only author and God is love itself, well, that just doesn't compute. Like I said, I simply do not know how to logically defend this argument, because there is no denying that the Bible is full of immorality. There's no denying it. But do we really have to adhere to this doctrine of the infallibility of the Bible? Is that the only way that we can even consider the Bible? Is it that black and white? I think it is useful to consider that the nature of God is revealed progressively through time, and man cannot have a full and true understanding of the nature of God. This is true even for the great prophetic figures of the Bible. However, this takes absolutely nothing away from the fact that they possessed a much greater knowledge of the divine than you or I. We must understand that we cannot forego our view of the pattern because of a lack of a perfectly consistent narrative. Just because it isn't perfect doesn't mean it's not useful. We cannot throw out the baby with the bathwater. I think it all comes down to how we approach the Bible. The Bible's immorality is a problem that many seem unable to get past. Well, if you see the Bible as having to be completely perfect and otherwise it is utterly useless, if you don't see that there can be something in between those two things, then you are never going to get past it. You're never going to get past this problem of the immorality of the Bible. And so if you're genuinely seeking after the truth, perhaps you shouldn't take such a black and white view. Taking that idea of how we approach the Bible, there's also another way to approach it, which also gives rise to the Bible's immorality being an insurmountable problem. I think you should consider whether or not you're using this problem of the Bible's immorality as what Wilfredo Pareto, the Italian polymath, referred to as a derivation. These are the logical explanations and justifications that we use to rationalize our non-rational social behaviors and beliefs. Now, it is very hard to distinguish between occasions when we have united our beliefs with the highest reason we can manage and occasions where we are instead using our reason to justify our beliefs. But perhaps you can see how we might be able to distinguish between the two. In this particular case, I think it is useful to consider the chronological ordering of the following. When did you decide to reject religion and become an atheist? And when did you discover the existence of war and slavery in the Bible? If you are genuinely seeking after the truth, you might find that you didn't arrive at the immorality of the Bible first and foremost, and then decide to reject religion and Christianity or become an atheist. You might find that you decided to become an atheist first. Once you have set your mind on such a belief, we all know how easy it is to get attached to it. I was attached to it a few years ago. And once you're attached to it, you're likely to seek justifications for it. And so, when you come across something distasteful in the Bible, you use it to hold on to this belief that you've become attached to. This is somewhat akin to what a bad scientist will do. He isn't interested in truth and desires only to justify his theory of the world. A good scientist will realize that it is likely for him to be biased towards his own idea, and so, in the interests of truth, he won't try and find justifications for his theory. In fact, he will rigorously search for evidence to disprove his theory. I wanted to bring up the idea of Pareto's derivations because this is something that helped me a lot in my own quest for truth. I even discussed this very idea in my second ever video titled Advice to My Younger Self. I hadn't come across Pareto and his theories at this stage, but I called them rationalizations, and it's the exact same thing. You have a belief first and foremost, and then you go out and search for rational explanations for that belief, rational justifications that you can use to hold on to that belief, whatever the reason you want to hold on to that belief might be. And so you need to ask yourself, how am I approaching the Bible? How am I approaching this concept of religion? Am I approaching it from the perspective of someone who wants to prove it wrong? Am I approaching the Bible in a manner biased towards the beliefs that I hold? Am I using the fact that war and slavery existed in the Bible to justify those beliefs? Am I a good scientist or am I a bad scientist? These are useful questions to ask yourself. Again, using that scientist analogy, here is an alternative way to approach the Bible. So we said that a good scientist will search rigorously for evidence that disproves his theory. Well, why don't we say, in regard to the Bible, truly I have no idea what this book represents in its totality, but it must be important because it has survived for thousands of years, although I can see that it is clearly not perfect. Why should that mean that I should just disregard it? How about I try and find something within it that disproves my theory of the world? Perhaps it isn't perfect, but not a single thing that has influenced my learning in the past was perfect either. A certain group of people might claim that it's perfect, but why should that deter me from exploring it further? Why should I render it utterly useless when I find that in fact it is not perfect? This is the main idea that I wanted to get across to you in this video. I only introduced the ideas about the nature of God and the infallibility of the Bible as it were possible that you mightn't have heard them before. They're just the tip of the iceberg. But I thought that perhaps they might aid you to restart that process of exploration when it comes to the Bible, when it comes to religion, and when it comes to God. I thought perhaps that they were useful to demonstrate that the only solution to the problem of the immorality in the Bible is not to reject the Bible. There are other solutions as well. Other solutions that don't involve us completely rejecting one of the longest surviving texts available to us. Like I said at the start of the video, I hope that these ideas can bring you closer into line with the good, as I believe they've done for me. But I suppose it wasn't the ideas that allowed me to accomplish this. I suppose the only thing that will really help you is how you decide to receive those ideas and what you do as a consequence. You have to do your own exploration and come to your own conclusions. It was reading the Bible and biblical commentaries and different thoughts and opinions and views on what the Bible represents that helped me. And it was the mindset and mentality of regarding the Bible with extreme seriousness and importance that allowed me to garner so much wisdom from that incredible book. And the option is there for you to do the same. And who knows where it will take you or what you will discover. The only person that can find that out is you. Thanks for watching, and God bless.